chat here. Here's.
All right, we're live.
Are we live? Okay, well, thanks so much for joining us again today here at 2 p.m. for the State of the Market video. It's Stephanie and Derek Evelo here with the Evelo team at Keller Williams Realty.
Hello there.
And today we have Bob Werner, one of our senior realtor partners, who is joining us to share just what is happening out there in the real estate market right now, the market of the moment. So we will, today we're going to try to answer some of the questions circulating around and with everything that's going on. And Derek's going to be asking some questions. And please, if you have any questions, please mark them in the comment section so that we can get them answered for you. We want to make sure that we're just here to act as a resource to keep you informed of what's happening. So Bob, do you want to kick us off? What is the current state of the real estate market and what's happening with the values in the marketplace right now?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of tackle that in two ways today. We'll talk a little bit about the pre-COVID-19 and pre-shelter and home situation that we're at least dealing with here in Indiana. And then maybe kind of tackle the second part of that is what's happened in the shelter in place situation moving forward, right? So I'm gonna go back and forth a few times today. I have some slides or graphics to share. So we're gonna go ahead and jump over to some of that now. And so one of the things, while we certainly don't know the exact impact that the coronavirus will have on the housing market, unlike 2008, we know that the housing market isn't the driver, right? This is a health crisis. It is something that's very different and unique to any of the economic recessions that we've dealt with in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And so from that perspective, it is definitely a little bit different, right? And then if I'll kind of jump into some of the stats. Our housing market statistics are always lagged by about a month. So the most recent stats that we have would go back to the end of February. So we'll kind of cover those here. Through the end of February, again, this is all pre-coronavirus situation. The median home prices had increased 9.6% year over year. In the month of February, we had 2,069 closed sales. Year to date, we've had just a hair under 4,000 sales overall. The average days on market had been going down again. It's 59 days on market for the month ending in February, and then a 1.9 month supply of inventory, right? That's another really key difference about how our market is different today from how it was in 2008. So
yeah,
I'm familiar with that term, that a balanced market is considered about a 5 or 6 month supply of inventory, right? So inventory is still really suppressed. And that means it's kind of economics 101. Anytime that demand is greater than supply, that keeps prices higher, which is why you see the 9.6% rise in median home sales price year over year.
And I think that's what we experienced back in that time. Prior to there in 2008, there was a much bigger supply, so the effect was way different than what we're going to then see and feel and what we're currently feeling right now.
Well, and we've also had this same low inventory for the last handful of years, and obviously now going through all this coronavirus stuff and everybody being stuck at home. My personal thoughts are, as soon as this thing breaks and we can all get out and get back to some normalcy, if you will, I think we're going to take off right where we left off, which is, buyers are going to be all over the place, and I still think there's going to be a shortage of inventory. So at least for the foreseeable future.
Yep, definitely some pent-up demand that'll probably be coming.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. So Bob, what data do we have on the housing market where it's doing today post coronavirus? Do we have?
Yeah, so there's, the solid data, like I shared on that previous slide, isn't really there yet. And even when that data comes ending the end of March, a lot of that will still be a little bit lagging, right? Because those homes that are still closing in March, they really went under contract sometime in January or maybe February, right? So there's still a lot of kind of lagging activity that's happening. And so those March numbers will probably parallel the February numbers pretty well. If we just kind of look at a slice of the last couple of weeks, right? We kind of had this week where the state of Indiana went on total shelter in place effective Tuesday. About a week prior to that, maybe 10 days prior to that, is when a lot of the schools started getting canceled and the restaurants were closed and the bars were closed, and there was kind of a recommendation to stay at home, right? But even during that period of time, you know, at the end of the day, homes are still going on the market every day. Obviously, you're still working with clients. We have a lot of listing alerts. So every day I'm seeing those. I'm seeing new listings come on the market. And in conjunction with that, homes are still going under contract every day. That's for sure. That said, no one really has a crystal ball, right? Or is a fortune teller to be able to say with certainty what's going to happen tomorrow, 3 days from now, 5 days from now, 2 weeks from now, right? We don't really know how this story ends. One thing we do know is we have some pretty good information on hand to show how this story is different from 2008. So I would like to pull up a few graphics again and kind of talk through those points a little bit, right? So one of the main things that caused the housing bubble crash in 2008 was the ready kind of availability of mortgages, right? The interest in mortgage-backed securities had gotten so high that it basically had to lend to anyone to be able to keep providing the product. And if you happen to be able to join us yesterday, you heard Mike and Phil from Finance of America talk about that very thing, right? And so the riskiness of those buyers increased pretty significantly. And that kind of—
That's an understatement.
Yeah. So that was a really big contributing factor to the housing bubble crisis in 2008 that we don't face now, right? The next item up here, give me 1 second, is just that the prices are not soaring out of control, right? So even though prices have been increasing on average of about 4 to 6% since 2014, that is nothing like the appreciation that was taking place in the years leading up to the housing crisis of 2008, where they were averaging more 8 to 11% on an annual basis. So that's a big deal, right?
That created really that housing bubble piece, the inflated prices. Mm-hmm.
Correct. And then that's obviously what contributed to people getting upside down, right? There had been so much appreciation, and I have another slide here that'll talk about that in a little bit, but people were borrowing against their homes, and the equity, the percentage of the overall equity versus the reality of the market value was significantly different. So I'll speak to that a little bit in a moment here as well. This one we chatted about just a minute ago, right? So leading into the 2008 housing crisis, that month supply of inventory was 8.2. Again, keeping in mind that a balanced supply is about 5 or 6 months. So we had an abundance of supply in 2008 and the crash, right? We just talked about our local market. Obviously, this slide here is on a national level. The slide that I presented earlier, our local market is 1.9 months supply of inventory, right? So we're even lower than that national number of 3.1 months supply that we see today. Next is just the kind of the difference in the kind of the percent of median income needed to purchase a home, right? So pre-housing bubble expense, people were contributing about 25% of their annual household income to their housing expenses. Today, that's dropped almost 10 percentage points, right? So even through job losses or job slowdowns or some adjustments in income, we're better equipped today to handle that because there's not as significant of a percentage of our income that's going to strictly our housing, okay? And then that last one we alluded to a little bit earlier, it's just that people are equity rich now. They're not tapped out. Prior to that housing crisis in 2008, because prices had soared so much, a lot of people were doing cash out refinances and then either going and buying boats or nice cars or putting
Paying
pools
off credit
in.
card debt or whatever.
Yep. And so
Yeah.
you can see the difference there. Like in 2007, the kind of total home equity cash out was $240 billion, right? And for the year ended in 2019, it's only 74 billion. And so in 2008, when the housing crisis started, when you have that much equity taken out of the equity that you have in your home, and then the value declines, suddenly there were hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that were upside down in their loans. And then when there was a job loss or a job slowdown, they didn't have the ability to pay that. So that's it on that.
Yeah. So I've got a question for you, Bob. So what does this stay-at-home order do for the real estate industry here locally? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so that's, at least, and I know there could be people joining us from outside the state of Indiana, but in the state of Indiana, under the governor's directive that went into effect this past Tuesday, real estate and real estate related services, so that's things like lenders, title companies, appraisers, contractors, insurance companies, builders, inspectors, etc. All of those have been deemed essential businesses in the state of Indiana. That said, the health and safety of our agents, our clients, our communities, it still is the #1 priority for our team right now, right? So that is getting creative, right? How can we still conduct a real estate transaction and minimize or eliminate in-person contact, interaction, et cetera, right? And a lot of the parts and pieces of a real estate transaction, we can do that. And there are constantly ways that are evolving every day of how we can improve that even further, right? I know we took a listing live yesterday as a team, and there will be no in-person showings, right? So we have a virtual tour, and that'll be the way that someone gets to see a home without having to travel, go outside of their home, go into someone else's home, et cetera.
Yeah, this ever-changing market, I think it's important that we share, and you alluded to it at the very beginning, but what we're sharing in this video today is what is happening right here today, because it could change tomorrow, right? Every day is kind of changing, just given the conditions with the health conditions and the market in general. So every day we're pivoting and trying to accommodate for whatever our client needs and public needs are. So, but first and foremost is always safety, right? Safety first, God, family, and business, and safety first with our families. So, I know one of the greatest questions that we get right now is, should I list now next 2 weeks or should I wait? Because I know right now we're on the 2-week governor's executive order for stay at home. So what would be our answer?
The 2-word answer will be, it depends, right? And I have one more slide I'll pull up here right now, just to talk about this and then expand upon that. So this comes from the chief economist at the National Association of Realtors. And just the gist of this here is the temporary softening of the real estate market will likely be followed by a strong rebound once the quarantine is lifted, right? What none of us know for certain is that another week? Is that another 2 weeks? Is that another 3 weeks? But like we talked about early on, we are already in a market where inventory is in short supply and demand is very high, right? So if there's a slowdown in the number of listings that come to the market over the next 1 to 4 weeks, that only means that the supply is going to be lower, right? And so when that quarantine is lifted, there is going to be an extreme pent-up demand for housing, right? And so it depends. To expand upon that a little bit further, there are always extenuating circumstances, right? You might be a buyer that has a lease ending in 30 days. And you are in the market to buy a home, and you either need to be in that home within the next 30 days or you lose that opportunity, right? Price point, at the end of the day, probably the price point with the lowest supply in our market is that kind of sub 250 or sub 200, right? Price point. That is where the demand is really high and the supply is really low. So if you have a home in that price point, it's very likely that we could sell that home without anyone ever going inside of that home.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of people might think out there, that sounds crazy, but we've all done it in the past, you know, where people have been out of town and we've either put them on FaceTime or something like that. I've sold several people from out of state that couldn't make it here in time to look at a property. And with such low inventory, they knew if they liked it, even by doing a FaceTime with them throughout the entire house, they still wrote an offer. So, you know, that's a lot of similarities there. So
Yep.
It's not unheard of, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a question, you know, we get asked, of course, is, you know, they're looking to buy, should they be looking at homes? So any thoughts on that, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar. I do want to just make one kind of maybe final point on the selling thing as well before we move on to that. And, you know, Derek mentioned, right, if someone's relocating here, they may not have a choice, right? They may have taken a new job or moved up in the same company and they have an entire family they have to get in a new home, right? At the end of the day, there are three things we all need to survive, right? If we ever watch Survivor or Naked and Afraid, the very first thing they do is build a shelter, right? That's because that's an essential element of survival. So that's our homes. The next thing they need is water and food. And then obviously we need our health, right? If we don't have any one of those three things, our existence is significantly compromised, right? Or just, you know, maybe you found out over the last 10 days that while you're quarantined, your existing home is just a little too small.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Maybe you just need something a little bigger. Everyone needs their own floor. We need a basement to dump the teenagers in, whatever the case may be.
I know the Evelo family is feeling like it's tight here. Yes, all confined within the same walls for
Absolutely.
while we've been here. Right.
We're all
I've only
planning on where we're taking our spring break, right? Is it in the kitchen? Is it in the master suite? Is it in the basement? Where are we going to go?
Right.
Right.
I saw the best, yes, I saw the best meme with that. That's what they had a picture of their house floor plan. They said they're looking at the map and trying to decide where they're going to go for spring break. I thought that was perfect. I told my kids the same thing, right? Everything's canceled. Sorry, this is it.
So if you need a few more destinations, maybe it's time to move up, right?
Right.
There we go.
Exactly.
We talked a
There you
little
go.
bit about that last week, right? We all, when we're all stuck in our shelter at home, that means that for the most part, we probably all have a little bit of extra time on our hands. So you can go back and check out the video we did last week. We talked about some great tips, things you could be doing now while we're in this shelter in place to prepare your home for going on the market later this spring or summer. So that you can be ahead of the curve to reaching that pent-up demand.
Yeah, and if somebody is thinking about selling and they're in for the next 2 weeks, they can definitely reach out, because I know on the video we shared, I think like 10 or 12 different items, but we have a list of over 20 some points to things that you can be working on while you're thinking about preparing during the quarantine.
Yeah, and just to give a for instance, yesterday, beautiful day out yesterday, I got to go out and cut the grass and trim down the tall grasses from over the winter and just get out and just get some fresh air. Do that. But then we also took a walk yesterday afternoon around our neighborhood and noticed all kinds of people out and about putting mulch down and just trimming things up. I mean, it's the perfect time to be outside to get those exteriors.
And mind you, we kept our social distance.
Oh, we did.
Even for my own mother, we walked by and literally waved to her, called her so she could come out on the porch and wave to her. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
You
you had asked the question about buying before we went into that, and next week we're actually going to do another one of these kind of, I'm affectionately calling them Zoominars now. I'm coining that phrase.
Right.
Instead of webinar, right? We all need to buy stock in Zoom based on how much that's changed our lives.
Right. I wish.
You know, but it's going to be similar to the selling side, right? And we already talked about some of those things. You know, you might have that lease ending, you're relocating from out of state. Maybe you even sold your existing home. And if you don't get another home under contract, then you're homeless, right? But we've got some ways that we feel we can still be, you know, kind of minimizing the risk by doing some of the virtual things and tours and not stepping foot inside a home, but still being able to help folks buy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next week.
Yes, and I was going to say we're all working in a virtual state at this moment, and we'll be discussing that and sharing some more of that out next week about the virtual plan of buying or selling, either or from a virtual standpoint. So fantastic. Anything else that anybody would like to share before we head off? Any questions from the audience or any questions out there, please feel free to post it. We'll make sure that we get your questions answered. Any last closing statements or thoughts, Bob or Derek? Anything?
Nothing for me. I think, like you said, if you have questions, want to dig a little deeper, we're all certainly still here for you, especially on the selling side. It's very easy to do a listing appointment virtually, so lots of options.
And I would just say, lastly, for me is, everybody is sheltered in place. Everybody, has been around each other, their family for a long time now. Think they may need some more space when all this gets over with. I know a really good group of people that can help them find a new place.
There you go.
The Evelo team, come on.
There you go. Well, thank you so much, Bob. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks for so much. Bob is one of our senior realtor partners, and we've got our team of 16 that's available to help and assist, and we've got lots of things that we can be doing virtually via phone, over the internet, and Zoom webinars, seminars, everything else. So just reach out to us. We'd be happy to help, and we just want to act as your resource. So let us know what else we can do to help you, and remember to stay home, stay safe, because that will actually help flatten the curve. So make it your best, and remember, as always,
make each moment count.
Bye-bye, guys.
See you guys.